If you stopped playing Humanitz after taking a few hits in the first few days, let me tell you something. Patch 1.02 has changed the game in a way that makes it well worth coming back. And look, I'm not just talking about minor fixes. Some mechanics that simply didn't work now actually make sense. But here is the detail no one is talking about. Along with the improvements came some changes that seem good in theory, but in practice can kill you if you don't know what you're doing. So today, we're going deep, 7 things that finally work as they should, and 3 that have become traps disguised as improvements. If you played Humanitz before this patch, you know exactly what I'm talking about. You get a car, start exploring the map at night, turn on the headlights to see something, and then the game simply decides you don't deserve to play anymore. The FPS would plummet, the screen became a slideshow, and you were left there frozen on the road, completely vulnerable to zombies, hostile players, anything. It was frustrating in a way few bugs can be. The worst part is that driving at night in Humanitz isn't optional. The game has a very prominent day and night cycle, and sometimes you just need to move in the dark, whether it's to escape a tricky situation, go on a supply run, or just explore without drawing attention. Doing that without headlights was basically visual suicide. You couldn't see a thing, and doing it with headlights was technical suicide. The game crashed. There was no good way out. With patch 1.02, this issue has finally been resolved. You can now turn on the headlights, use the fog lights, and simply drive. The game runs normally. It seems obvious to say it like this, but it's one of those changes that transforms the experience in a real and immediate way. Night exploration finally works the way it always should have. This specific fix tells me something important about the direction the devs are taking with the game. They are listening to the community, prioritizing issues that directly affect core gameplay, and delivering fixes that make a difference in the day-to-day life inside the server. If this is the standard for future patches, Humanitz has a lot of room to grow, and I'm here to follow every update with you. Humanitz had a specific collection of exploits that made combat fundamentally unfair. Invisible zombies were a problem that affected everyone regardless of context. Pure PvE, solo survival, it didn't matter. You simply took damage without seeing where it was coming from. The other issues, shooting through constructions, tent invisibility, respawn invincibility, and the bow reload exploit were more targeted at PvP, but created an environment where real skill carried less weight than knowing the right bugs. Patch 1.02 closes all of that at once. Each of these exploits had a different impact on the game, but the combined effect of removing them all is the same. Combat now responds to the rules the game establishes. Shots go through what they should go through, invisibility works as an intentional mechanic and not a geometry bug, and respawning doesn't temporarily turn you into an untouchable being. These are fixes that seem basic, but in practice define whether the game can be taken seriously competitively. What matters most to me here is the signal this sends to those who are waiting to return to humanity. Combat exploits are frequently used as an argument to give up on a game, and rightfully so. When they disappear in a single patch in such a comprehensive way, the message is clear: the developers are committed to a clean game. This doesn't solve everything at once, but it creates the necessary foundation for the rest of the development work to make sense. Fair combat is the prerequisite for everything that comes after. Base building in survival games is one of the systems that relies most on fluidity to work well. It's not just about building structures, it's about that sense of progression, of seeing your space grow, of entering and leaving the environments you created, and feeling that they truly exist within the game world. The problem was that in Humanitz, every time you tried to walk through the door of a shed, an awning, or a stable you built, the game brutally reminded you that something was wrong. Stuttering appeared at the most inopportune moment possible. This specific hitching was particularly annoying because it happened at a transition point exactly when you expected continuity. You built your base, invested time and resources, and then every time you entered or exited your own structures, the game froze for a moment. This type of problem has existed in survival games with base building for a long time, but that doesn't make it any easier to accept when you're in the middle of a session trying to manage resources with enemies around. With patch 1.02, this problem has been eliminated. Entering and exiting sheds, awnings, And stables is now smooth, without interruption, without that moment of anxiety waiting for the game to recover. It sounds trivial described this way, but anyone who played before knows that this fix changes the rhythm of an entire base building session. You start moving through your own construction with confidence, and confidence in the system is what allows you to stay focused on what really matters. What this fix represents more broadly is a commitment to the base building experience as a whole. When developers fix the exact transition points within player structures, they are signaling that they understand where the immersion was breaking. Lighting in survival games isn't a luxury, it's a necessity. Torches exist to create safe zones, mark perimeters, light up night camps, and give you that feeling of having control over the surrounding environment. The CB radio is communication, coordination, and presence within the world. The problem was that in Humanitz, using these items frequently was a choice between having visibility and having performance. And when the game forces you to choose between the two, something fundamentally wrong is happening. The practical impact was cruel, especially for those playing on servers with other people. You wanted to light your base correctly, place floor torches at the entrances, keep the radio on for communication, and the game would simply start to stutter. Every additional light source had a measurable performance cost, which created an absurd situation where the solution to playing well was to deliberately leave your base darker and less functional. With patch 1.02, this cost has been eliminated. Now you can use torches, floor torches, and the CB radio without anxiously monitoring if the frame rate will drop. You can light your base the way it makes sense for your playstyle, not the way the graphics engine could handle. It's a freedom that seems basic, but completely transforms how you interact with the game's lighting system. What I like about this fix is that it unlocks creativity. Base building has a real aesthetic dimension, and when you no longer need to ration light sources as if they were a scarce performance resource, you start thinking differently about how to organize your space. Torches become a design tool in addition to a survival tool, and the radio becomes a natural part of the game flow again. These are exactly the kind of fixes that make a survival title grow from functional to genuinely enjoyable to play. Bugged skills in survival games are a different kind of problem than other bugs. When a weapon has a wrong hitbox or an enemy acts strangely, you notice it immediately and adapt. But when a skill seemingly works, you invest points in it, build your progression around it, and only after hours do you discover that part of the effect was never actually being applied. The betrayal is much deeper. That was exactly what was happening with resourceful, resilient, and base defense in Humanitz before patch 1.02. The resourceful bug was particularly frustrating because it directly attacked the construction loop. You would get close to finishing a structure, and the skill that should have facilitated that process simply didn't deliver. Resilient was even crueler in its timing. The resistance skill that should work after dying or reconnecting, two of the most vulnerable moments in the game, failed exactly when you needed it most. Investing in survival and finding out it didn't work in the worst possible situations is the kind of thing that makes you question every build decision you've ever made. The base defense fix is the one with the most immediate and measurable impact, especially in PvP. Not only does this skill now apply the correct defense values to structures, but those values have even increased. For those playing on competitive servers who invest time building bases that need to withstand attacks from other players, this completely changes the security calculation. Your base is now as resistant as the game indicated it would be when you chose that skill. What these three fixes have in common is that they all affect trust in the progression system. When skills don't work, you stop trusting the choices you make, you start testing everything before investing, and the game loses that sense of reward that should come with character development. Now that resourceful, resilient, and base defense behave as they should, you can finally build your progression with the certainty that what is written in the description is what will happen in practice. And that trust is worth more than any numerical buff. Quest progression in a survival game is a delicate element. It's not the main focus as it would be in an RPG, but when it works well, it gives you direction, reward, and that feeling that the world around you has a structure beyond the immediate survival loop. When it breaks, the frustration is disproportionate to the size of the problem because you stop trusting the progress you're making. In Humanitz, delivering items to NPCs one by one was exactly the kind of small friction that accumulated irritation session after session. The fix for multiple item delivery seems simple, but it completely changes the rhythm of interaction with NPCs. Before, you stood there clicking repeatedly to deliver a stack of resources, each click a reminder that the system wasn't working as it should. Now, you deliver everything at once and move on. It's the kind of improvement you notice more by the absence of the problem than by the presence of something new. And that's exactly how good quality of life fixes should work. Challenges completing correctly is the change that carries the most weight in terms of trust in progression. When a challenge didn't register even after you met the conditions, it created constant doubt about whether what you were doing was being counted. This is especially problematic in games where you invest real time in specific objectives. The disclaimer about shared servers is important and honest. Some rewards still go only to the first player who completes the challenge, so it's worth being aware of that depending on how you play. The overall result is that main quest and challenge progression is now reliable, and reliability is exactly what this system needed. You can follow the main narrative, complete challenges, and interact with NPCs knowing the game is recording everything correctly. In a genre where most time is spent on immediate survival systems, having a structured progression layer that works without unpleasant surprises adds a long-term dimension that keeps the game interesting far beyond the first few hours. There is a huge difference between a game that has a quest system and a game where that system actually works. In Humanitz, the structure of missions and challenges was always there. The NPCs, the objectives, the main quest progression, but the execution had flaws that turned what should have been rewarding into something frustrating. Delivering items one by one to an NPC while you have an inventory full of resources is the kind of experience that feels like a bug even when it isn't, because it simply doesn't make sense within a modern gameplay flow. Accepting multiple items at once resolves a friction that seemed small in isolation, but accumulated in every NPC interaction over an entire session. Even more important is the fix for challenges completing correctly. This was a problem that undermined trust in the progression system in a silent and constant way. You met the conditions of a challenge, waited for the registration, and nothing happened. After a few times, you start to question whether it's worth investing effort in objectives that might not be counted. It's worth paying attention to the server disclaimer. Some challenge rewards are still exclusive to the first player who completes the objective on that specific server. It's not a bug, it's intentional design, but it's something that can catch you by surprise if you don't know. Depending on how you play, solo or on a full server, this can directly affect which challenges are worth prioritizing in your playtime. What this fix ultimately delivers is something every progression system needs to exist: reliability. When you know the game is recording your progress correctly, that NPCs respond as they should, and that challenges complete when conditions are met. You can finally engage with the main quest and side objectives without that background anxiety that your effort might not be counting. This trust is what turns paper progression into real progression. Patch 1.02 did a real job of improving performance, and it would be dishonest not to acknowledge that. The lighting fixes, the base building stuttering, the headlight issues, all of this represents genuine gains that make the game more playable than it was before. The problem is that real improvements sometimes create a dangerous expectation that the problem has been completely solved. And in the case of Humanitz's performance, this optimism can play a nasty trick on you in the middle of an important session. Frame degradation over time still happens on some machines. It's not immediate, it's not constant, but at around 30 to 40 minutes of gameplay, certain PCs start to see the FPS drop progressively. It's the kind of problem that is almost more frustrating than a fixed and predictable bug, because you never know exactly when it will happen. You're in the middle of exploration, invested in a risky situation, and the game starts to stutter without warning. If you don't know this behavior, you'll think it's a hardware issue before understanding what's happening. The server restart every 6 to 8 hours remains mandatory, and this is practical information you need to incorporate into your session planning. There's no use scheduling a long operation without considering that the server will need to restart within that window. Players who ignore this cycle and build game plans around long, continuous sessions will eventually be caught at an inopportune moment, either losing progression or seeing performance collapse before the restart happens. The trap here is specific. trusting that the patch resolved all performance issues and playing without any mitigation strategy. The smart approach is simple. Monitor your session time, perform preventive restarts before the 6 to 8 hour window when possible, and if you are on a machine that suffers from progressive degradation, consider relogging periodically before the problem appears. Graphics settings are one of the first things any PC player touches when installing a new game. It's almost automatic. You go into the options, evaluate what your machine can handle, adjust textures, resolution, shadow quality, and find the right balance between visuals and performance. It's a ritual so established in PC gaming culture that most people don't even question if the settings are actually working. And that's exactly where Humanitz catches you off guard. The problem with texture and resolution settings is specific and persistent. In practice, only high and low actually work. If you are trying to play on medium or making fine adjustments to save VRAM on graphics cards with less memory, the game is not responding to what you configured. You think you're running on a balanced and optimized setting, but under the hood, the engine is doing whatever it wants. This explains why many people complain about inconsistent performance, even after the patch, without being able to identify the cause. For players with mid-range GPUs, this is particularly problematic. Medium exists precisely for this audience, the player who doesn't have top-of-the-line hardware, but also doesn't want to completely sacrifice visual quality. When this option doesn't work as it should, you're left without the middle ground you needed. Trying to save VRAM with custom settings also doesn't work because the game ignores those adjustments in the same way. The trap here is simple but invisible. You configure the game thinking you've optimized everything, and in reality, nothing significant has changed. The practical solution for now is direct. Choose between high or low with the awareness that these are your only real options. If your machine can handle high without issues, great. If it can't, low is the way to go until the developers can fix this behavior. Trying to navigate in the middle of this bug will only leave you confused about why the game isn't behaving as you expected. Raiding in a survival game is one of the most adrenaline-filled moments the genre offers. You plan, gather resources, choose the right weapons, study the target space, and execute. But all of this assumes you know the rules of the game, which weapons work against structures, how much damage each one causes, and how much time you have before being intercepted. Patch 1.02 changed these rules significantly, and if you are still operating with previous knowledge, you will arrive at someone else's base with confidence and leave with shame. The change is twofold and combined. Several weapons were removed from the structure damage list, and the structures themselves became more resistant. This means your favorite raid weapon might simply no longer cause any damage to walls and doors, or cause a fraction of what it did before. At the same time, even the weapons that still work need more time and ammunition to finish the job. If you enter a raid with the old loadout and the old mentality, you will discover this nerf in the worst possible way, in the middle of the operation, without enough resources to finish what you started. The connection to the base defense skill fix we saw earlier is direct. It wasn't a coincidence that the devs increased structure resistance in the same patch they fixed the base defense skill. They are rebalancing attack and defense at the same time, making legitimate bases harder to take down while builder skills finally work as intended. The net result is that raiding now requires more planning, more resources, and specific weapons that have been tested against the new system. The trap here especially affects players who developed efficient raid routes before the patch and haven't tested anything since the update. Before any serious raid, it's worth taking the time to test your weapons against structures in low-risk situations, understand which ones still cause damage, and calibrate expectations for the time and ammunition required.